The world is discussing the results of yesterday's second round of France's parliamentary elections. Here on The Bottom Line, we will try to gauge the impact of the outcome onto the European economy. And I'm now joined by Professor Krzysztof Piech, an economist from Warsaw's Łazarski University. Good afternoon, and thank you very much for joining us.
Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me again.
So let's assume that the French left will be able to form a government, whether or not it is with Macron's party or without, and subsequently will try and enforce some of their fiscal ideas. How do you think that this will affect France's fiscal position?
Of course, the left-wing parties announced their wishes to slightly increase the budget deficit, even up to 111% of GDP, which is already high numbers, and it may even grow up. Of course, to some extent to protect the labor market and to some extent also to stimulate the economy. And still, we don't know what will be the coalition. If the coalition is formed, what is probably the possible outcome, then the budgetary deficit can be even larger together with the national debt. That can also rise in the future, because usually when you have two or more parties in the coalition, then the negotiations result usually in a higher budget deficit, and then later on also slightly higher debt figures.
And do you think that the new government may push Brussels for more fiscal leniency? And we already know that France's situation is rather precarious.
France, from this point of view, is usually the exception from the rule because of the deficits and the public debt that is exceeding the limits, the Maastricht criteria, for a long period of time. But nothing happens with this kind of large countries like France compared to many other smaller countries that don't have this kind of power of influence on Brussels. So from one hand, we can say that France perhaps will put some more pressure on Brussels. But on the other hand, we can't imagine the coherent economic policy in the EU, especially in the Eurozone, without taking into consideration the French opinion on that. So if, despite the tensions, I think France will still continue its policy and the proper policy that the left-wing parties propose.
But just going back to the earlier part of my question, if France indeed tries to push for more leniency from Brussels, when countries like Italy, for instance, want to push for a similar attitude from Brussels?
Yes, but this is not a new situation. We have this kind of situation for many years. And of course, the fiscal rules should be universal and should be applied to all possible countries of the EU, especially of the Eurozone. But actually, it is not the case usually. So despite this kind of fiscal problems, the situation is almost the same for years, even in the largest countries like France or Italy, as you mentioned. So I don't think that the situation will change dramatically in the future.
And some would say that perhaps we are about to witness the beginning of a Eurozone in the crisis. However, there are differing opinions, and I'll just share a couple angles before you bring in your opinion. So we have UniCredit's Eric Nielsen, who says that the possibility of markets degrading French debt to junk are very low. So the likelihood of that is very low. Inflation is coming down. Some commentators say that actually we are expecting one or two downgrades from rating agencies. That is on the cards, and we should be expecting that. And actually, we should be expecting another parliamentary election in the near future, that really we are on the brink of a period of turmoil that will affect the markets and, generally speaking, the Eurozone. What are your thoughts?
I think much bigger problems we had about 2010, when there was actually the the first financial crisis of 2008, and that then it ended up with a debt crisis 2 years and 3 years later. That was the serious situation, and we should be concerned about. But at this moment, we don't have any threats of bankruptcies. The financial situation is rather stable, what is very important from the point of view of any changes in ratings of countries. So besides, even if we have slightly problematic situation in Germany, I mean, the growth is not as high as expected, but it doesn't mean that the whole European Union or the Eurozone should change its position, and the rating agencies should intervene in decreasing the evaluation of the prospects of the economy. So the situation is not very difficult compared to the situation that we had 15, 14, 13 years ago. From this point of view that we had during the real crisis, and now the situation is much, much better, although the long-term problem still exists.
We look at France, but it's impossible to separate this from what is happening in Ukraine and in the wider situation for Europe. How do you assess this situation, especially from an economic perspective, and how does it bode for Ukraine's accession talks and in general the support for the war in Ukraine?
I think the good summary of this position was the one that was given by Donald Tusk, Polish Prime Minister, who said that because of the elections in results in France, Kiev is happy, and Poland can feel safer also from this point of view, and because of that, because that was what was really threatening, was the possible outcome of the elections of if right-wing parties, if Le Pen wins, but that didn't happen. So from this point of view, I think we in Poland can feel safer, and Ukraine should feel safe as well, counting that the West European will still continue its financial support to Ukraine, and military support as well.
But from an accession perspective for Ukraine, because the economic factors are inseparable, how would you assess the outcome of the French elections?
This is a very long-term debate, and probably the government that will be formed, we don't know what kind of a government, will not be able to, let's say, solve this kind of issue. So the accession of EU to EU may take a decade or even longer. First, most important is to finish the war at Ukraine. So this is the fact that we should concentrate more. So the accession is not the, let's say, the issue to discuss at this moment.
And the hung parliament, which is what we're looking at the moment, some say actually leads to increased chances of France's clashes with the EU over fiscal policy, and keeping in mind that France and then Italy have had the excessive deficit procedure opened against them, along with some other EU countries. Where do you think that actually puts France at the moment?
Maybe we should try to understand why the fiscal rules have been created. There was a threshold that was universal for all the EU countries. However, if we look at the geographical and historical perspective, what we can see that larger countries with solid economies may have a stable economy, even having higher deficits and debts related to GDP. That's why it is also possible and justified from economic point of view to have slightly more difficult fiscal situation in France and Italy. While, on contrary, it is not the case for Poland and for smaller countries from Eastern Europe. That's why we should remember the differences between the countries. So, from this point of view, even if the fiscal rules are broken in both countries, France and Italy, it is not a serious threat for the economic growth in the future, apart from the situation that that costs something and it has to be repaid or rolled on. So that's always costly. However, we can expect in the future the inflation rate going down, and that will also be less costly in the future.
So the bottom line is we are not at the threat of a Eurozone crisis.
Exactly. This is what I think about.
Okay, brilliant. That was Professor Krzysztof Piech with us here from the Łazarski University, here with us on The Bottom Line. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.